I'd like to be the first to welcome everyone. Good afternoon. Glad you're joining us for our Optimizing Business Central webinar. My name is Elizabeth Morris, and I'm the event manager here on the marketing team at Cavallo. I have a few housekeeping items I want to chat about before we get started. Today's webinar is going to be about 45 minutes of really good content, including live demos, and then we're going to save plenty of time for the end for your questions. But feel free to ask questions at any point throughout the webinar using that Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen. And Matt will definitely address those as they come up. So I will facilitate those. Today's webinar is being recorded. You're going to be able to access that directly on our YouTube channel within about 24 hours of today's event. We are very excited to have Matt Grierbill with us today. He is our Senior Director of Solutions and Engineering. He's going to walk you through 6 use cases that help distributors 10x their efficiency while protecting every single dollar of margin. So really good stuff, really important stuff. So without further ado, I'm going to kick things over to Matt to entertain us.
Awesome. Thanks for that intro, Elizabeth. And yeah, welcome to the webinar today. Really excited to jump into this content. Yeah, the profit first order journey. So we're going to go through 6 use cases, and the value you can take away from today is get a better understanding of how you might be able to optimize your Business Central environment with some of our tools to really reduce some of the manual touch points and really drive value in your organization. So with that, I'm going to jump right into this, give you a little bit of background on myself. As Elizabeth mentioned, I'm the Senior Director of Go-to-Market Engineering and Sales here at Cavallo. I've been with Cavallo for about 8 years, but in the ERP space for about 12 years. And prior to that, I was in manufacturing for about 14 years. I worked for a small aftermarket manufacturing company in the Harley-Davidson aftermarket space. My current hobby, I like to switch hobbies around quite a bit. My current hobby is making pizza. I've got this obsession of trying to make the perfect New York slice right now. And my real dream is to have a food truck by the beach someday. So that's a little background on myself. But let's go ahead and jump into this. The agenda that we'll walk through to get you to that value today is first kind of talk about the cost of inefficiency in organizations and what that looks like, and why we exist at Cavallo to really support addressing that. We'll talk a little bit about the foundation of Business Central. We are an add-on to Business Central. Business Central is a great modern ERP interface. We just enhance that and really get you some more value out of it. And then we'll go through the 6 technical use cases and wrap up with a little Q&A after that. So I thought I'd start with this quote. So this was taken from a recent study that was done in conjunction with McKinsey, and I thought it was quite interesting. And it really ties in nicely to why we exist at Cavallo to drive that efficiency for you. And so I'll just read this quote: 20 to 30% of operational expenditure is lost each year to rework, miscommunication, repetitive tasks, fragmented systems, friction, and misaligned processes. Across industry, this amounts to trillions in unrealized value, or roughly 250,000 to 600,000 per mid-sized company annually. And so they go on to say that the single biggest source of lost profit in mid-sized and enterprise companies isn't competition, innovation, or market conditions, it's inefficiency. And so that's why we exist, is to help you recapture a portion of that $1 trillion that's lost every year to inefficiencies. And so let's talk about Mission Control. So Mission Control is part of the Cavallo suite of products for Business Central, and it's kind of our flagship product in that space. And so simply put, what Mission Control does is it replaces high-touch manual tasks with automated margin-protected workflows that immediately accelerate cash flow and recapture profit. And we're going to go into specifics on how we do that in just a moment here. But that's really what we're doing, is we're taking Business Central as a great platform to start with and just really looking at those manual processes and automating as much as possible to recapture some of that lost labor, improve your cash flow. So as I mentioned, Business Central is really the foundation. It's a great modern ERP system, great interfaces. It really solves for the most part, most of what users need. We're kind of just a supercharger that attaches to it, and so it's going to help you to gain some operational efficiency in certain scenarios, reduce clicks, recapture some of that lost efficiency to overhead. Um, so let me jump into a little bit of our field of play. And so where Mission Control really creates value is from the time you get an order into Business Central. And we acknowledge, you might be getting orders in through EDI. You might have an iPaaS solution that's connecting some other, channel sales tool. You might have an e-commerce shopping cart that's dumping orders in, or OCR, or maybe even an AI agent, or just entering them in manually. Once they're in Business Central, from the time you get them in Business Central to the time they're hitting like the warehouse management, for example, for pick, pack, ship, it's that space in between. If you encounter complexity, that's really where we provide a lot of value. And by complexity, I'm talking, if you have back orders where, maybe you didn't have enough stock, what do you do in those situations? How do you know when inventory arrives to satisfy that back order? Are you combing through back orders every day, identifying line items that can go manually and pushing those through the system? Drop ships is another one. If you do a lot of drop shipping direct from vendors to your customers, are you manually going out to requisition worksheets, multi-selecting lines, generating the POs? All those extra clicks and screens can slow you down, especially at scale. Reservations is another big one, and we have kind of two flavors of reservations we'll talk about today. There's, one that's kind of a simple reservation scenario, and another that's more advanced. And so one of the things with reservations in Business Central is it's a great tool to allow you to recognize what you have left should you satisfy your current obligations. But it can be a little bit tricky because they're applied in a FIFO sequence. And so let's say, for example, yesterday you received an order that's not due for 3 months. That took a reservation, but today you receive an order that's due tomorrow. Maybe that order that was received yesterday that's not due for another 3 months is tying up reservations, so you don't have stock available, or it looks like you don't have stock available for that new order that came in. And so we want to do that in a little bit more prioritized fashion for you, and really take into account variables that might be important. Like maybe you don't want to reserve until that order that's not due for 3 months, until it comes in a little bit more close proximity to the due date. So that frees up the stock for that new order that came in today. So we want to talk about that scenario. There's also a more advanced scenario that we support that we built out for a specific client. And we liked it so much, we put it into the core solution. And this is where if you have a buying group that you sell to, or maybe you have channel sales, where you have a commitment to that group of customers to maintain a certain inventory level of a particular subset of items over a specified period of time, to make sure that you have them available to fulfill for that customer group. We have the ability with our tool to create an advanced reservation hold on inventory for a specific set of customers or a specific customer, so that when the actual order comes in, it draws that advanced reservation down. And while it's doing that, you can still sell those onesie, twosie orders to the other customers. It's just drawing from the available stock, but it's keeping that advanced reservation in place for those large strategic accounts that are expecting you to have that inventory available over a specified period of time. Other things that we can do: validations and approvals. And by the way, these are all just rough buckets of things that we can do. There's probably 10 to 15 different ways we can approach each of these different use cases. But validations and approval, this is one that we probably have just an infinite number of use cases that we can apply. And this is really making sure that we're validating things on orders rather, that could cause problems downstream if we don't confirm them upstream. So for example, we've had customers where they wanted an extra set of eyes on an order that exceeded a certain dollar value, because they wanted to make sure there were no mistakes on it. They wanted a management approval before it was processed for pick, pack, ship. And so, looking at lines, looking at sales document totals, and saying, hey, does it break this rule? Let's create the visibility and the notification so that it has the eyes and makes the corrections before it goes downstream. So that's kind of validations and approvals. But like I said, there's probably just an infinite number of ways you could apply the validation tool. Payments is another big one. So we do have a PayFabric integration, and with the PayFabric integration, we can on the order do things like create an authorization and then capture that authorization, later on in that process. And so if anyone out there has had a situation where you've done all the value added work to pick, pack, and ship an order only to find out the card was declined. Now you've got a big opportunity cost. You spent all that time prepping an order that's not going today. It's not impacting your finance. And now you may have the task to unpack it and put it back on the shelf. And then you've foregone the opportunity of another order going through that could have had a positive payment on it. So by doing that authorization and that capture strategically through that order management process, we can really clean up a lot of that. And then the last one here, automated printing. And I'll also talk a little bit about document generation. So we had a particular customer that had a integration with different e-commerce carts. And when they would come in the morning, all those orders were sitting in Business Central. They were fully integrated. But the first task of the day was they were going into those orders, manually generating the pick document, manually generating the ship document, and then printing them, and then taking that stack of printed documents and putting them in a inbox in the warehouse where they could then go and do the pick action. And it was taking 2 to 3 hours a day to do that. And as they scale, it's going to get worse, and they expect it to scale quite a bit. And so that's another thing that we can do with our workflow engine is, if an order comes in and we validate it and it's got stock, we can, generate the pick document, generate the ship document. If you have a printer that's an email to print options support, if it has support for that option, we can trigger that email to go to that printer, hit that printer, and actually generate the print jobs for those as well. So they're sitting there, waiting for you. And so that's another scenario. And again, these are all aimed at, reclaiming some of that time in your day, reclaiming some of that overhead, getting that net margin back that you're losing on all these manual tasks, as well as ensuring nothing passes through that shouldn't pass through that required a validation that may have been missed. And so we're going to dive into these use cases now and really see what that looks like inside of Business Central with Mission Control layered on top. And so I kind of talked about each of these. So I'm going to kind of breeze through these a little bit more. But when we're thinking about drop ship orders, we could consider a problem statement to be, there's a manual touch point there. We've got to go in, look at the requisition worksheets. We've got to, multi-select our lines. There's a manual effort that we have to do there. And so it's impacting our cost to process. And let me get back in my slideshow there. So it's impacting our cost to process. And so with Mission Control, we can automatically route an order that has a dropship line item on it to a dropship queue in that flow, and then trigger the purchase order creation. So it's virtually touch free from that. And when we think about bottom line value, we always like to everything that we design at Cavallo has bottom line impact in mind. And so when we think about the bottom line impact here, it's that net margins, reclaiming that labor overhead that we're not doing that. And again, it may not seem like a lot, one order, two orders, but in scale, it can start to have a pretty negative impact. So let me go ahead and I'm going to switch my screen here and go into Mission Control and Business Central. And so we're going to switch that over. And I'm going to start here on my dashboard because I'm going to spend most of the time executing and showing the documents actually flowing through. But I want to start here on the visualization layer. And so this is the sort of the visualization dashboard that you have when you install the Mission Control in your Business Central environment. And what this is doing is this is showing you your order document or your quote document or your invoice document, and then all of the different queues that document could go through as it's processed. So maybe there's a drop ship queue, maybe there's a pick pack stage, maybe there's a create invoice, maybe there's some holds for different rules that you want to evaluate. But as the order progresses through each of those stages on its path to collecting the cash, you have total visibility of those orders. And so I can see the total document count in each one of those stages or queues. I can see the margin associated with that, the total revenue. And if at any given point I wanted to see specific orders in those queues, I could drill into that particular queue. So for example, if I wanted to know, okay, I've got 16 orders on back order, what are those back orders? Let me drill in and look at those documents specifically. I can do that. You can also filter this out. And so if you wanted to look at, particular queues that are useful for you. So maybe in your role, I just want to look at the approval queues because that's my role is to approve. Or I'm a supply chain analyst or I'm in the supply chain team. I'm monitoring back orders. I want to look at that queue and just understand what's happening there. You can filter these out so that it's only showing you the relevant data that speaks to your role as well. But that's the visualization layer that I wanted to mention. So as I show the execution side, those orders are going to flow through this workflow here. And this is something that you define. These aren't predefined by our teams. This is built out by you through implementation with of course the support of our teams to match your specific business process. You're not locked into how we think about distribution. We adapt to your process flow. So let me jump into a customer record, and we'll start here with that drop ship scenario. So I'm going to go into this customer, and I'm going to generate a new document here. And so we'll do a sales order here, and I'm just going to add a line item. So we have this particular chair. This is a drop ship item. It's just asking me if I wanted to reserve it. And I'm going to put the purchasing code as dropship on this line item. So I have this sales document and it's got a dropship line item on it. A couple things before I execute this order and kind of show you the workflow actions that are triggered. We're going to have a workflow queue on the sales document header that's going to show you what stage it's in. So you'll always have that reference, and that correlates to that dashboard that I showed previously. And so new order is kind of my entry state for the workflow. So that's where it's at right now. I'm also going to be using the submit action. So this is a Cavallo action that I've promoted to my main menu here on the sales document. So when I submit this, that's what's going to push it into the workflow. But keep in mind, we have in our backend automation rules. So if you wanted to evaluate a queue and try to move a document out on a scheduled basis or on a periodic basis, for example, every 15 minutes, we want to evaluate the back order queue, and we'll look at that example in a moment. And if stock's available, grab that stock and move it out of the back order queue. You can do those in an automated action as well. I'm just going to use this submit for today so that we can see it in real time happening. So let me go ahead. I've got this line item on. It's in my entry state. I'm going to hit submit on this order. And when I hit submit, what will happen is it'll recognize that there's a line item on there that requires a drop shipment. So it'll move it into my drop ship queue, and it'll also generate my purchase order for me. So not only do I have visibility that, hey, that is a drop ship sales order, so I can distinguish from my other orders. But if I look over here on the left-hand side, we also have a docked view that will show any documents that we're auto-generating for you through that workflow process. And so there we can see there is a purchase order that was generated, and there is my PO. And it is in fact a drop ship. And if we look at the ship to, it is the customer address that was taken from the order, and those are linked. And so all I had to do was hit submit. I didn't go to a requisition worksheet, look things up, multi-select lines, generate the PO. All I did was hit submit. And technically, I don't even have to do that. We could have an automated action that picks that up and pushes that through. So very, very low effort to generate those documents. So let's go through the next use case, and I'm going to go back to my deck here. And let's move on to the next one here. And this is the back order management scenario. And so in this case, we're looking at situations where you have a back order. You don't have enough stock. There's insufficient stock to fulfill the line items. So it's a true back order. And then the challenge becomes, once you do have stock arrive, how do you, in an automated fashion, recognize that stock and reserve it against a back order and move it out to the pick, pack, ship process without having to manually go through all those orders and kind of manage that day to day. And so a couple success metrics to think about. First, there's the cost to serve again, that overhead to manually go in and do that on a day-to-day basis. But I also think there's an argument to be made for things like days of sales of inventory. So days of sales of inventory is a metric to recognize how efficiently you're converting inventory into revenue. And by shortening this period with better backorder management, more automated backorder management, you could argue that you could impact positively your DSI and improve your cash flow as well. And so when we think about our benefits here and kind of how we approach this, again, the workflow will automatically identify these things and move them through and process that without having to manually touch it. So let's go ahead and jump into that scenario. I'm going to move back to my Business Central environment, and I'm back on my customer record here. And so we'll go ahead and do a new document. I'm going to use that same item, but this time instead of doing a drop ship tag on that line item, I'm just going to push that through as if I am expecting stock and I'm going to fulfill it from my location. And so this is going to be a true back order situation. So when I submit this, we'll see that push through workflow and move into my back order queue in just a moment here. So we can see that, again, I have visibility that is a true back order. So now, what we would typically do in a production environment is we would have a workflow rule looking at that back order queue and evaluating it every hour, say, or every half hour. And if the stock is sufficient to move that forward, we would just move that forward, make the reservation, move that into pick, pack, ship. And you can apply other prioritization rules. So if you wanted to look at, a customer class or something like that as a criteria, we could also include some additional rules for making that reservation and pushing that order forward. But I'm gonna go and add some stock just to kind of show mimic what happens when a receipt comes in for a particular item. And so let me grab this 900S and I'm just going to do a adjustment to the on hand for that location. So let's say I get a receipt in for 1,000 units. And so now we have stock. And so that item is now in stock. And if I go back to the sales order, I'm going to hit submit, which again, this would be an automated action that's either periodic or scheduled. And when I submit this, it's going to recognize that it does in fact have inventory now. And so the next step in my process here is pick package. And if I scroll down, you can see that that's exactly where it went. It's in pick package now. It let it out of the back order queue because it did have stock. And if I look at my line item, we can see that the reserved quantity was captured because we do have stock now. So I didn't have to go back into the document, look it up manually, check my reports, see what I could do. It's just evaluating that queue and saying, hey, there's stock now, move that forward for me and put that in pick package. So that's another scenario where we can really reduce that overhead burden and that manual effort. So let me jump into the next use case and we'll frame this up. And we're going to get into our reservation scenarios next. And so, as I mentioned, this first scenario is kind of the simple reservation scenario, and this is where we do we want to recognize the ship date and recognize that, hey, if something isn't due for a while, maybe we don't want to reserve it so that we have stock available for orders that have a ship date that's in closer proximity to today's date. And so this is going to be that scenario where we can avoid those false stockouts by being a little bit more selective in recognizing the required ship date in those reservations. And so we've worked with clients that it's a big game they have to play every day, shifting things around and looking at orders. And so when I think about measuring success in this regard, I really think again about cost to serve and that sort of net margin. You could also argue that you've got a better return on assets because you're more efficiently processing these orders out in doing more with your tool set. But that's kind of the idea there. And so with our workflow, we can evaluate conditions like, when is the required ship date? Do I want to set a threshold or like a time fence, for example, to say, hey, if it's outside of these boundaries, let's pull that reservation off and leave that sitting in a future hold queue and bring that back into the fold once it gets closer to its due date. And so that's exactly what we'll see next. And so I'm going to jump back over here and go back into Business Central. And so let me get out of that previous order for the back order, and I'm just going to create a new document. And we'll kind of manipulate the document dates here just to kind of show what this looks like. So let's say our requested delivery date for this particular customer order isn't until May 29th. So it's a little ways out. And I'm going to add this Athens desk. I've got it in stock. It can make a reservation, but I probably don't want it to because I want to keep that stock available for anything else that comes in that's required sooner. So when I submit this to workflow, it's going to evaluate those dates and say, hey, this is far enough out beyond our threshold. Let's move it to a future order hold queue. And so that's exactly what it did. It moved it into future order hold based on this requested ship date or delivery date rather. And if I go down to my line item here, we can see that the reserved quantity was removed because it's not required right now. I don't want to tie up my stock with that soft reservation or that soft hold on the inventory. I want to keep it available for customers that may have orders that are required sooner. So let's kind of mimic next what happens with the passage of time. And so I'm going to bump this date up and let's say time's passed. And now we're within, 1 day of the due date for this. So I'm going to submit this again and do this manually so we can see this on demand. But what you would typically do in your production environment in this scenario is you'd have an automated rule that we have in our workflow engine to look at that queue and say, let's evaluate all these orders on a periodic or a scheduled basis and say, hey, if they're within this threshold, move them out, reserve them, get them back in the process flow. But let's go ahead and submit this so we can see it happen on demand. And we'll see this pop up in just a moment. And this should forward on into pick package because it's now within that uh, requested delivery dates within my threshold. And so we can see that right there. It's moved to pick package. And if I go down, I can see that the reservation was made, and that's now moved into pick package. While I'm on this order, I'm going to cover another use case. And again, this use case is the document generation. But when we generate or when we move documents through queues, we can also trigger actions like generate documents. And so you'll notice that as that went into pick package, it also created, just like we saw the dropship PO creation, it created my pick and my shipment document. And if I want to view those, I can go ahead and view those from the docked view, and there's my warehouse pick and my warehouse shipment. So I didn't do anything to generate those other than move that through my workflow, and it created those for me. So I want to spend a little bit of time. This is also a reservation scenario, but this is going to be a little bit more of an advanced reservation scenario. And I'm actually going to back up for a moment to my mission control dashboard, and I'm going to go into my reservation hold queue. And so this is where I have a reservation hold order. And so this is that scenario I described where if you have channel sales or if you have, a buying group that you are committed to have a certain amount of inventory over a specified period of time, available for that particular customer. This is how we would manage that. And so from my reservation hold queue, I have a reservation order here. And if I drill into that order, I'll go down to my line item detail and I can see here that I had originally 150 units on this order for that item, 250 of that item, and it looks like I have 75 remaining of the reserved quantity, 250 remaining of that other line item quantity. And so what happens as I get an order for a customer that can borrow from this buying group hold order, it's going to automatically reduce that reservation and reapply it to the new order that comes up. And so let me just back out of that here. And so I'm going to go into this customer and kind of show what that looks like. And so um, the way we make the association, we have a lot of flexibility in the way we make the association to that hold order to a specific customer. In my case, I'm using the customer priority field, and anybody with buying group can borrow from that future hold order. That doesn't mean to say that's how you would set it up. You can use any field on the customer level to make that relationship. So, if you wanted to, and we actually support custom fields. So if you wanted to create a custom buying group field, you can do that. But whatever value you set on that, you can make an association of that value related to that customer to that future hold order. So it knows, hey, there's a future holdout. Go ahead and borrow stock from that for this particular customer. That's just how I'm making that relationship today. But let's go ahead and do a new document. I'm going to do a sales order. And I'll add the item was a 1906 was one of the items. So let me just go ahead and add that on here. And we'll do 10 units for this item. Okay. And so now that I have that, I'm going to submit this into my workflow. And I have a rule that says, hey, if there's a buying group customer, move it into a reassignment queue, and it's going to automatically pull the reservation from that previous future hold order. And so you can see it moved into inventory reassignment. And if I scroll down on the order and look at the line items, we'll see that the reservation quantity of 10 was captured. And if I go back, I was previously at 75 units on that hold order remaining. And I'm just going to jump back into my dashboard here and go into that hold order. So this is my reservation hold queue. And we'll go into that order and look at the line item. And we can see that the quantity dropped down of the reserve quantity from 75 to 65 because it took that from that previous hold order and applied it to that customer that's from that buying group. And so, like I said, the scenario there is, you have a commitment to a customer group or a specific customer to maintain this inventory for a specified period of time. We can create that reservation in advance, hold that inventory, so that you can continue to sell the onesie twosies to other customers from your available stock, but it's going to hold that reservation for you and then draw it down as you get those specific customers to come in and buy from you there. So that's kind of the advanced reservation scenario. Let me back up for just a moment, kind of check where we're at in the agenda. Um, One other rule we'll talk about here, and then we'll jump into a little bit of Q&A and wrap. I'm going to jump back into my deck and talk about validations and approvals. And so validations and approvals is kind of a big bucket of things that we can do. And so, if we wanted to check margins, as is the case here, I've kind of got this described where we're looking at a particular margin level. I've got a rule that we'll look at that looks at a particular dollar value on the order. But anything that you need to check or validate on a document that is important to catch it upstream before it becomes really problematic downstream, this is where that validation and approval comes into play and can be very effective for you. And so I'm going to jump into Business Central and kind of show a scenario with a large dollar value order and what that looks like to flag it and move it into a hold queue. So let me go ahead and share that. And I'm going to jump back out to my customer here, and we'll do a new order. And my rule is set at 25,000. So anything above that is going to trigger a notification as well as a hold requirement for me. And so I'm going to put this item on here, and I'm just going to manipulate the price so that we can see this rule trigger. And so I'm going to put this in here at 26,000. So it's going to be above my rule threshold. And so I'll go ahead and submit that, and we're going to see a pop-up here that indicates that it in fact broke a rule of my large order hold rule. And so I'll go ahead and confirm the submission on that. But we can see that in our Cavallo business rules, we have the large order rule has been broken. And so if I want to view that as an approver, I can go ahead and view that and approve it. We can also trigger notification emails. And so whenever you have something like this that breaks a rule that you have, a business rule, you can notify the appropriate people to take action on that. And you can actually filter your dashboard views to look at just the documents that are requiring your approval on the back end as well. And so again, if I wanted to approve that as an approver, I can come in and say, okay, let's select this item and mark it approve or reject, and push that through. And so that'll go back through the process. And so now it's back into my entry state from that large hold queue, and I can go ahead and resubmit and push that through. So that was the last use case I wanted to talk about, and let's do a little bit of a recap of some of the things that we covered today. So we get to our field of play. So again, we looked at back orders where, if the document was insufficient stock, we didn't make the reservation, it moved it into a back order queue. We mimicked what happens with an item receipt and then submitted manually. But again, you do that automatically in a live environment, and it recognized there was stock now, grabbed the reservation, moved it into pick package. We looked at a drop ship scenario where the drop ship automatically routed to my dropship queue and generated the matching PO. We looked at two reservations, one date related, where we're saying, hey, if it's not due for several days, let's not do the reservation. And as it gets closer, let's automatically reapply that and move it through the process. And then we looked at a more advanced scenario where, if we do have a buying group or something that we need to have advanced reservations for, we have that hold in place, and then we're drawing down stock as the actual orders come in. We looked at a large order that triggered our large order rule, moved it to a large order queue, required an approval. We didn't touch on a payment scenario, but then we did look at the document generation where once that back order made it out of its queue and moved into the pick package, it also auto-generated its pick document as well as its shipping document. So those were kind of the main scenarios we wanted to cover today. We have a couple minutes, so I do want to touch on one last thing in the mission control environment, and that is that everything that you saw today can be built with zero code. It's a no-code interface, and so you can stand this up and get value out of your Business Central environment from this in very short order. And so I just want to touch on that briefly with the last few minutes here. So I'm going to share my Business Central screen again. And as you saw, all the execution happens out of Business Central. The logic lives in our application. And so this is our application on the back end. And so to create your queues, you would just add new queues and then you can sequence them however you see fit. So it's adapting to your business, your logic, the way you talk about things. If you don't call it a future hold, maybe you call it something else. You decide what you want to call all of these different statuses and steps. And as you set these up, you can resequence them however you see fit. Once you have this sort of rough skeleton, then determining how the documents flow is what you do in this next portion here. And so this is just an example of my entry state and all of the different places this document could go depending on the conditions that apply. So I'm just going to move this into edit mode and kind of show you a couple things that can happen. So first off, any queue can have an action when an order goes into it and an action when it goes out. And so my inbound actions on this new order queue, I'm authorizing a credit card payment. I'm also, or in this case, just doing the authorization. I thought I had another rule on there. But yeah, so I'm authorizing a credit card payment. So that's the first thing. The second thing is we're determining what's the primary path. So once an order goes into the state, what's the primary path that it goes to next in a perfect world? If everything is satisfied, there's no contingencies, no alternatives, where does it go next? In this case, it's always pick package. But if there's in the real world, there's scenarios where we don't have the stock or it's a drop ship. There's complexities in that order management process that we need to account for. And that's where we define our alternate paths. So in my case, for example, I have a future hold path where I'm saying, hey, if this field on the order, which is the requested delivery date, is after a number of days from now, and that number is 5, then move it to the future hold queue. And the outbound action is to remove the inventory reservation. So that's exactly how that worked in the back end. And to build these conditions out is really quite simple. We give you access to all the business objects. So whether it's an order level field, a customer level field, a field from the line item, a field from the item's product, so the product master. So you can access all of these business objects. And then once you have the business object identified, all the fields are available that you can select. So you, like I said, no code. It's all through the drop downs, selecting them. What's your operator character? Is it like or equal to, greater than? Depending on the data you're evaluating, the operator characters will change automatically for you. And then that's what routes it through those orders. Now, we also have automated actions. As I mentioned, I was hitting submit throughout the demo so that we could kind of see in real time the document moving through. But I'll give you a good example of an automated action that you'd have likely set up in a production environment. And this is, we're going to move it out of back order. And so what this is going to do is look at these conditions, and if they're true, it's going to move it out. And so I'm saying, hey, if the quantity available for this item is more than or equal to the quantity on the line item, so we've got enough available stock now, then let's move it out of the back order queue and let's trigger the action to make that reservation. And as far as when we do these automated actions, how we execute, you can do periodic, which you can set a time threshold. So is it every 15 minutes, every 30 minutes? We can also do a scheduled basis. So is it a particular day that we want to evaluate our back order queue? Is there a particular time? Maybe we know every weekday by 11 a.m. That's when all of our inbound trucks and all of our receipts should be in. So let's go ahead and evaluate it an hour after that and try to push everything through. But this is an example of the automated action that can be taken. Um, the last thing I'll mention is our business rules. And so I'll use this one in particular because I used it today. This is my large order rule. And so what this is saying is any order that has the total is more than a certain amount, in this case $25,000, let's flag that as a violation of that rule. And let's apply that rule to look at all queues. And if that happens, let's notify this approver. And then we can decide if we want to email the submitter of that order once it's been reviewed. So if the sales rep that entered that order wants a notification that, hey, that rule has been evaluated, we can notify them as well. And the evaluation policy also helps us determine, is this something we want to evaluate once, or do we anticipate changes happening to this order throughout the process such that we always want to evaluate it? So no matter what queue, we always want to evaluate on a change. Does this rule break down, and should we have some kind of evaluation happening to this? Um, so that's sort of the high level overview of that backend. I think it's just so important to note that it is zero code. You don't have to have any background in any kind of programming language. It's drop downs, selection choices. And so you can get this stood up in generating value in very short order for your teams. I did mention custom fields as well. So in the context of, hey, how do we make the relationship between a buying group customer and a reservation order? Maybe there's a custom field that we're using to make that. So part of mission control also includes this concept of custom fields. And so you can simply create these custom fields, and when you publish them, they'll automatically be available in Business Central to use either header or line level. So the custom field setup is just what object does it apply to, customer document, line item, or the product master. What data type is it? Is it a number, percent, a text box? What does that look like? And then, like I said, that'll be available in that Business Central environment, and you can consume that in your workflow as well as a condition to evaluate. And so that's another aspect of that. Um, so with that, I'll go ahead and stop. I know we're about at time, and we wanted to leave some time for some questions. So Elizabeth, if you wanted to jump back on and
Yeah.
see if there's any questions. But thank you everyone for your time. Really appreciate you hanging with me there and going through those different scenarios.
Yeah, Matt, earlier when you were talking about the
Oh,
solution being
I think you
zero
might be
code,
on
no
mute,
code.
Elizabeth.
What's that? Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, still can't hear you.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Nothing yet.
All right. Can you hear me, Matt?
Can you try again? I think it might have been on my side.
Can you hear me?
Yep, I got you. Yep, got you.
Awesome. Cool, cool. So I was saying earlier when you were talking about the solution being no code, someone asked about timing to implement. I assume it's pretty quick, right? No developers needed. So with it being cloud, pretty
Yeah,
fast.
yeah, I've seen it 30 days or less. And that's
Okay.
for full workflows and rules flushed out, tested, user adoption, all of that.
Okay, awesome. And then someone's asking about licensing. Can you talk about how that works?
Yeah, so it's a site-based license. So it's not based on individual seats or anything like that. So it's a site-based license, and it would apply to your Business Central instance.
Okay, good deal. And it looks like the last question, how does Mission Control work with Power Automate?
Yeah. So we have a webhook action that can be triggered through our workflow. And a common use case for that webhook action is to call Power Automate to perform some kind of function. So, for example, you wanted to trigger some kind of email through your email client outside of the standard emails that we do in our service, or if you wanted to look at a table or perform some calculation. We've had scenarios where customers wanted to do a pricing calculation and pull that back into the order, and so they've used webhooks and some Power Automate tools to perform that. So it works really well with Power Automate as kind of an additional layer of actions that can be triggered through our workflow.
Fantastic. It looks like that's going to conclude all of the questions. Of course, if anyone has a question come up, definitely reach out to us. Matt, thank you. Appreciate your knowledge here. Thanks for sharing with all of us. And most importantly, thank you to all of you for joining us today. We hope to see you at future webinars. We have an events page on our website where we list all of our upcoming events as well as previous past events that you're able to just click into and view recordings. So, great resource. I recommend bookmarking that. If you'd like to explore your organization's specific needs or have questions about what you heard today, definitely reach out to your account manager. If you're not quite sure who that is, just shoot me a message at marketing@cavallo.com and I'll make sure your email gets in the right hands. So, once again, thanks for joining us. We hope everyone has a great day. And
Thanks,
that will
everyone.
conclude the webinar. Thanks, Matt.